Welcome, everyone, to Leading with Soul. Can we really bring our whole selves to work with William Miller? Um, we're so glad that you're here, and welcome to those of you that are joining us in the live webinar, as well as those of you that are joining us live from YouTube. And then welcome to the Conscious Leadership Academy. We provide a series of courses and webinars that are designed to enliven and bring forward our conscious leadership, and whether that's at home or in the office or whatever the environment is that we're bringing that forward. I'll tell you much more about William's course that's coming up in just a bit. During this time today, if you have an opportunity, uh, William will be asking some questions, so there'll be an opportunity to raise hands or to participate in the conversation. And there will be a poll for you to fill out, a very quick one that'll will give us a lot of information um, at the basis of this for William's incredible stories. And the last thing I wanted to say before I turn it over to William is just to give you a sense of who William is and all that he's up to. William is someone I've known for 40 years, and his work on corporate innovation has changed the way we think about innovation in work and what a leader's role is in innovation. Originally, William worked with the Stanford Research Institute with the Innovation Management Program, and was the co-founder with his wife, Deborah, of the Value-Centered Innovation. He's published several books and is really thought of as one of the 30 top leaders on leadership worldwide. Uh, there's so much more I could say. Bottom line is, I know how wise and how remarkable your research is, William, that you've done over all these years. And I really look forward to this time together today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Very, very much. And welcome to everyone, though, including those who might be watching this after the fact. And just wanted to say, add what Karen said about 40 years, that this has been a topic around spirituality, leadership, organizations, and so on that has interested me that entire time. I remember back when I was writing my first book, The Creative Edge, the last chapter was of prophets and profits. Profits and Prophets. And I actually wrote that as the first chapter and decided in these times I probably can't start that way, so I'll put it at the end. And I'm happy to say now is the time to make it the first chapter when we talk about leadership. And I'd like to embark on that by telling a story of an interview I had with Edgar Mitchell, who was part of Apollo 14 that landed on the moon. And I had the opportunity to interview him for an hour and a half about his experience there. And while we talked about the creativity it took to do that mission, what really struck me was what he said about once they had gotten off the moon and were heading back to Earth, and they saw something like this that you see on the screen. Here's what he had to say. He said, seeing Earth and the whole solar system against the background of the cosmos had a very profound effect, an overwhelming sense of being connected to all things. What came out of that experience was an enormous sense of responsibility that goes with the power of creativity. And that means letting go of fear. Automatically, that brings us this deeper sense of love and responsibility for oneself, our surroundings, our environment, and the planet as a whole. And he capped that off as much as that touched me with a memorable phrase. He says, we went to the moon as technicians. We returned as humanitarians. And when I think about leadership, it's much the same. We can do leadership as the technicians of leadership. We can learn ways of developing strategy, ways of motivating people, ways of doing process improvement, quality improvement, ways of doing marketing. And yet, it's missing something. If you're just a technician of leadership, let's just say, it's very skilled, very smart, and yet where's the humanity? Where's the soul? And that's what we'll be going into. Is what is the soul of leadership? That is the underbelly, the foundation support for those skills that we develop as leaders, and how that can change the way we're effective in what we're doing. Now, when we talk about spirituality, we all have our own lives, our own families we were raised in, the cultures, perhaps the spiritual traditions or faiths that we were raised in. And so I'm not here to offer any definition of spirituality. It's all what you make of it for yourself. But I do want to talk about welcoming the diversity, that spirituality can mean so many different things, and that we can learn from that diversity. Just for example, in the research that my wife and I in our Global Dharma Center nonprofit did, along with two other colleagues from Denmark, Peter Pruzan and Kirsten Mikkelsen, Pruzan. So one person in our research of these executives who were willing to be totally overt about their spiritual connection and how that basically informed and guided the way that they made decisions and ran their businesses. One person said, spirituality is a deep connection with a force greater than myself, very individual, lived experience that includes both longing and belonging, expressed through love and compassion. That person's theme was oneness. Another person, he said, for me personally, it's strongly associated with Christianity. For me, it's an acceptance of the existence of God and to adhere to my religion. And his theme was love God and love your neighbor, aim for excellence. Third person said, my definition is spirituality is that each soul is potentially divine. My goal is to manifest that divinity in myself and help bring it out in every other person. And so with that, what I'd like to do is address that there are different ways that we could be coming into this conversation, and what you each might be holding for yourself. And with those, I'm going to read the statements, and then we're going to do a short poll. So for some people, they enter this conversation that we're having today saying, I feel connected to life and nature, but I don't call that being spiritual. Or I view myself as spiritual, but I can't be spiritual in my job. So I'm hungry to see how I could be. Or I wonder how spirituality can make me more successful. I want to integrate my spiritual self in my leadership. Or I see my leadership as an expression of my spirituality. So one of the, you might have different times that each one of those makes sense to you or is how you feel. But I'm wondering what you would say is most often like you. So there's a poll. I'd like you to go ahead and just click what you would have to say. Which one of those five is more likely? Karen, you're welcome to do this too.
I did. Thank you. That's exciting. And for those of you that are watching live and you don't have access to the poll at this point, I think you can have some fun reflecting on these 5 different places that you might be approaching this from. Yeah.
Right. So we have basically wanting to integrate my spiritual self in my leadership and seeing leadership as an expression of my spirituality itself as being really the top runners here. So with that, I'm going to stop the screen share for now and bring us back into the room together, and to welcome Greg and Blanca. So the question is, how does this kind of starting point really, how does that could affect a leader's way of running their show, of influencing a team and the outcomes? I wanted to start that point before I move into a discussion of that with two different stories. One is a man named Lars Koland who ran a company called Oticon, but he was hired there to do a major turnaround. In the turnaround, it was that they had been the leading company of hearing aids, maybe a 15% market share globally, but they fell on hard times and it was down to about 7% market share and so on. They brought him in to turn it around. And in doing so, he told us about the spirituality that influenced him all along the way, which is that he was influenced by his Christian background. He did have that sense of love God, love your neighbor, do unto others. And so what he did when he had to turn it around was, first of all, realize they had to downsize. But how he did that was, first of all, to not only just pick out the few people, the dozen or so people that were necessary for the turnaround, but to say anyone over 50 would not be let go. Because in Denmark at that time, it was very difficult for people over 50 to get new careers going if they were that age and they were out of a job. He said, we're not going to put people through that after all their years of devotion to this company. He said, the people we will first let go are the ones who have the easiest chance of getting a new job of the other ages, which is counterintuitive to the normal way of saying, no, you want to keep all your best talent, let the people go who are not going to be, have a harder time to get a good job. So people didn't understand what he was doing. But when the dust settled, he also said, I will personally meet with every person that we're laying off. He says, I don't want my managers to have to go through being with them through that difficulty. That's my job. But he said people were so amazed at what he had done that there was a spirit of coming together with the talent that was there. But he said the second step was to then build the company around a new vision. They were always known as the leader in technology for hearing aids. He says, technology is not what we're about. Let's find a new vision. And what he talked about was to help people. The new vision became helping people with impaired hearing to live as they wish with the hearing that they have. And the distributors said, finally, someone gets it. This is what people want. And as he then started working with the company, going through every project, screening them back out according to that essentially he was able to get the company profitable within 2 years. 5 years later, they had tenfolded their profits and they were back to recovery into becoming a world leader again in a way that you would not think in the normal way of doing layoffs would be. But he said he realized that it was about love my neighbor as myself and do to others as I would have them do unto you. His spiritual guidance came from his upbringing that way. And notice also, it was more implicit than explicit. He was simply doing it. He wasn't advertising, I'm being spiritual, and so on. There's one other person I wanted to introduce you to. His name is Janice Webb. She was a VP at Motorola, one of my own clients as a consultant for a couple of years. So I got to know her well, got to know her people well. And her spiritual theme as we talked to her in the interview was God in everyone. That, we're here, God puts us here to be happy and to become spiritually mature. And she said, I think that God intends us to find a way to be not judgmental, to avoid being envious or greedy. That I'm here basically to leave these cravings behind and to convert them into compassion and love. Now, I want to read to you what she said about the business as a whole. She says, a company that has soul has compassion, and a company doesn't have a soul or not. She says, yes, you do perform in a capitalistic model, but you do it with integrity, with absolute deep respect for people. It doesn't mean that you can't be tough, and it doesn't mean you can't strive for big goals, but you can be competitive, but with compassion. But if you're competitive without compassion, you will lose your soul. And this is what has happened so much in companies along the way. And so there is this notion of how the spiritual brings alive the humanity in our way of thinking about leadership, thinking about how we work with people, and so on. Janice also said that she believes that a position of power is really a position of serving the people that report to you, and that she sometimes leads them and sometimes they lead her, because that's what it takes for people to really coalesce around true leadership.
It strikes
Yeah.
me that part of what makes it work is when it's purpose and achievement, when
Yeah.
there's not a either or.
Mhm.
So that, because I think we may have all experienced, I have experienced people who are so into their spirituality and their purpose that they lose effective action. And
Mhm.
other people are so into effective action, they have shut off the broader dimensions of who they are,
Mhm.
and that link of bringing the two together into one whole, I think is quite extraordinary.
Yeah. And there are more and more companies that say that they're purpose driven,
Hmm.
which is very interesting. There's a time when Deborah, my wife, and I were in India and talking to the board of directors of a national minerals corporation there. And where that conversation went to also was not just what's the mission or vision of their organization, but what is before having a mission?
Mm.
What is their understanding of life about?
Mm. Mm.
They call it the swadharma of a company. So
Ah.
I know that Methodist Hospital did something like that also. They said, we exist in a world, this was the Methodist religion running the hospital, but we exist in a world that was created for God where all people are valued, and that our purpose is to treat each other with compassion. Statements of values, a statement of more of a context within which you have a purpose. And I've also seen companies that have a purpose, like say Patagonia, which I'll talk more about in a second. They say our purpose is to save the planet. Well, this purpose is bigger than any organization can do on its own,
Mm.
but it's an inspirational purpose. It says this is where our energy is building a momentum, and joining a momentum is joining a movement. Um, Even Mary Barra at GM once talked about how the purpose of GM would be, I don't remember it all, but no accidents, no injuries, no
Mm.
congestion, and no pollution.
Mm.
You know, to work towards those kinds of goals, even as they're making cars, automobiles. So when we talk about purpose, it can be very big at that level. And very inspirational to the employees to say, that's what I want to give my life to. Maybe that's how we discover the purpose. Listen, I want to thank you for that. I love this conversation, but there's a couple of next steps I'd like to take us on this journey together today. And one is to visit a way to look at where we are today by going into past history. That's back to Adam Smith, who's considered to be the grandfather of modern capitalism, wrote The Wealth of Nations, happened to have a phrase in there about when people do things for their own personal benefit, it will accrue to be a national benefit. And he called it as if it were guided by an invisible hand. And we've heard about the invisible hand in the marketplace, that the market will always temper itself. But 16 years before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments. He was a moral theologian, basically. And he wrote 6 versions of that book before he died in 1790. And so he was always writing that the moral sentiments, which he defined as what the cooperation with the deity was about, was the moral sentiments was what was going to run mankind into doing what is correct to do for mankind or not. and that was always the foundation for which he was writing The Wealth of Nations. So I'd like to read you a couple of quotes from him about what he called moral faculties that way. He says, these faculties were plainly intended to be the governing principles of human nature. By acting according to the dictates of our moral faculties, we necessarily pursue the most effective means for promoting the happiness of mankind, may therefore be said in some sense to cooperate with the deity. But then he also made the contrast, the disposition to admire and also worship the rich and powerful, and to despise or at least to neglect persons of poor and mean condition, is the great and most universal cause of the corruption of our moral sentiments. So what I've seen from that is that he gave us a moral, spiritual foundation for economic principles. And what we've done is we threw away the moral principles foundation and left what he said about economic principles, and it got infested with greed and other things that he said were the counter to the moral sentiments. What I'm seeing today is a resurgence back to heal that in some way. I think the discussion of purpose was one piece of that. When the Business Roundtable in, 2019, issued a statement that said, for these past decades, we've been saying that the purpose of business is to maximize shareholder wealth, shareholder value. And we are now we're issuing a new statement that supersedes this previous statement. And that is a statement that says that leading their companies has to be for the benefit of all stakeholders, or customers, employees, suppliers, communities, and shareholders. So just beginning to put that fabric back together that Adam Smith had woven so tightly together has got ripped apart. And I see that the purpose-driven company is like that. And it brings me to just speaking of, I mentioned Patagonia earlier, because the CEO from 2013 to 2020 was Rose Macario. She was also the COO and CFO before that. And it was founded by Yvon Chouinard, I think it is, to be a company that had the mission of saving the planet, literally. But Rose was the person who really brought that home in multiple ways, in terms of expanding the brand trust and the reputation, the activism that they portrayed and invested in. They even had an ad once called, they had their premium product, most popular product, on a Black Friday advertisement after Thanksgiving. And the ad says, don't buy this product. It made headlines. But it was really about how they were investing in, we'll buy back your stuff. We'll help you mend it. Well, it's good. It's a good product, but even we have an environmental impact. And here's how we're trying to mitigate that and to encourage you not to buy everything that you see that we have. And it actually surged their sales because people believe they want to give their energy to something like that. So again, a couple of things that she said. She was raised on Buddhist meditation. She said, that's taught me how to listen deeply. She relies on it every single day. And she says, if you're not working on your own ego, you can't lead with integrity. That leadership is really around moral courage to act on what you know in your heart is right. And she said that we defend the earth because we're a part of it. Standing up for the earth isn't politics, it's spiritual responsibility for all we share. Which brings us right back to Edgar Mitchell, the sense of responsibility that he felt and love. Just seeing the earth floating in space and having that perspective, rising above our day-to-day and seeing the whole. So again, it shows in these stories that I've given you here. I want to be clear. I'm not trying to say that if you're spiritual, you're going to be more successful. There's too much of the technician part of leadership also that contributes to that, as even Karen was saying a little bit earlier. The distinction here, though, is that you can be successful and spiritual at the same time. And that has been the gap that has held this back for so long, I've seen over the last 40 years. People saying, well, isn't business a dog eat dog world versus my spiritual is so benign? How can I bring those two together? And that's the work. I liken it to, you may recall there's a old highway in the USA called Route 66. Goes from California, goes about 2,000 miles down to Santa Monica and Los Angeles, through the Southwest. And there were hundreds of books written about Route 66, all the things you could do, the places you could stop, the people you could meet, the beautiful scenery you would see. And it became a road, not that you traveled to get to LA fast or get back to Chicago quickly. It became a road to have adventures. And I feel like if that's how we can take the sense of spiritual leadership, what's the adventure of it? What's the healing that we can bring to the world? What's the almost daily satisfaction we can get just for even a small increment? You know, you only drove 50 miles, but boy, what a great scenery you got to. Let's camp out here. So that's my sense I wanted to bring to this last part. Just to see if that sparks any further discussion right now.
It strikes me, William, that Route 66 also became a song. It became an icon. You know, it
TV show.
became a TV show. And that there is in my experience, there's a quality of uniqueness that you almost can't put your finger on, but that is there with leaders who have that integration of effective action, achievement, and their spiritual side, however that has unfolded for them or however they define that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think about a client of mine at DuPont, and or a client of mine at the local utility here, PG&E. Nobody could quite define, I'll use Claude as the example. Nobody could quite define what made Claude so effective, but they knew he was, and
Mm-hmm.
they even though there were all the politics and all this, all the stuff going on, Claude had a way where he held a center in the midst of it that people came to trust and came to work with. In fact, Claude attended, I'm just remembering, Claude attended the conference that you and I hosted at the International Management Institute in, I think that was 1989,
Mm-hmm.
and Club Pont Soleil. He was a wonderful leader that I had the pleasure of working with for 3 years, and watching how he could stand in front of the group. His English wasn't perfect. His leadership sometimes seemed sort of awkward, but the resonance that he held carried initiatives forward in different ways
Mm.
than they had been able to do before.
So, well, there's one last thing I'd like to do in our time today. I'm going to share my screen one more time. And let's see, where am I? Right here. Click down a bit more. Oh, by the way, that was this was Lars and Janice and Rose that we've heard from
Mm,
today
mm,
back in the time. And then
mm,
here's just a short list of what are some of the challenges that people could experience and what are some of the benefits of growing or addressing those challenges if you feel them in the first place. So, for example, doubting that you can be spiritual and successful at the same time, like Blanca, you were talking about. And the opposite of that is being able to trust in your spirituality as the foundation of leadership. So And the first two on each side is more to do with inner work, in a sense. And the last two are more about how you're bringing that inner spirituality into the world. Talking about energizing and manifesting a positive future, or bringing people together in heartful, meaningful collaboration, and feeling the strength to bring it out into the world. The first two are more of building that trust in yourself, that confidence of your spirituality.
I would say a benefit is that is the resonance, is that those you encounter potentially find can make different choices for
Mhm,
themselves.
mhm,
I remember running a big EPA meeting, and one of the participants was a new lawyer, the head lawyer that had just started at the EPA Region 9. And when he
mhm,
spoke in the circle, it changed everything. And he,
mhm, mhm.
afterwards I said, "Who are you? What do you do?" And he was a Zen meditator, and he brought that 4 a.m. practice
Wow.
into every tough conversation, changed everything.
Mhm.
So I think that's a benefit.
Karen, I think it's about time for us to bring things to a close. Would you like to take
Yes.
the reins?
Yes. Thank you so much, William. Thank you. Would you move to the next slide there? And
Yes.
I want to acknowledge this conversation today. Every time we speak and I hear you speak, I discover a new possibility, a new way in which I can more fully ensoul my own spirituality in everything that I'm doing.
Mm,
I can discover again and again where those polarities are that I've let in. So thank you. This was a very uh, interesting and invigorating session, and all these stories that you have that are make it so real. And I think that's it. Anything else that just welcome to all of you that are live here today in person and on YouTube, and welcome to all of those of you that are watching the recording. And we're so glad you were here. Thank you, William. Thank you for your experience and enlivening understanding of this broader self that we can bring.
thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and thank you so much. Thank you so much.